organization, being an entrepreneur or being whatever industry you are running, it will do you good. So that a lot of amendments have come which are really, really very good for the labor as well as for the management. On 8th of December, again, we have an interesting event. We are doing jointly with IM Alumni Association of Ahmedabad. That is monetary policy, inflation and financial stability, balancing trilemma, where we have Ravindra Dolakia. He is going to be the speaker. Please do come. We have an outstanding panel that day. Then on 12th of December, we have 7th Swami Memorial Lecture. We have Mr. Amitabh Kant, former former Niti Aayog chairman and also former Sherpa and G20 is going to be there with us on 12th of December. Please do come and join us. At least I will walk miles to listen to Mr. Amitabh Kant, brilliant thought leader and good speaker. Then on 18th of December, we have Babu Krishnamurthy on Read and Grow. Then on 10th of January, we are doing an event jointly with GLIM. That is the next gen or the Toyota model. There's a white paper written by GLIM on Toyota model. That is Karakuri to Kaizen. And we are going to have a half-a-day session on what is the thing. It will be very, very useful for the supply chain people as well as those who are really, really putting in place the best model. Toyota model is one of the best models. Is happening on 10th of January. 19th of January, again, we have an event from Lucknow to Wall Street. Leadership lessons from building global research powerhouse. We have Devina Mehta. She is a founder and CM of First Global. She's again from IIM Ahmedabad. She's a gold medalist from IIM Ahmedabad. We have been getting a lot of IIM Ahmedabad officers to come and speak here. It's indeed a privilege for us. She's going to be talking on 19th of January. Then we have an event by Mridula Ramesh on 30th. Then we also have an event on 2nd. He is a second Balachandar Memorial Lecture. This is again the distinguished speaker for that is Vijay Govindarajan. Dr. Vijay Govindarajan really doesn't need any introduction. Is again authority on management guru, management thought leader. Then on 7th of February, we have again a book on, we are discussing on a book which is very, very relevant today. Help. Can you hear us? Navigating Societal Fault Lines in Children. Again, Vidya Shankar Chakravarti is going to be talking to us. Then on the 11th of February is our flagship event, MMA Annual Convention 2026. I'm closing it now. Let's come on to the thing you all come to listen to. One of the outstanding thought leaders in today in India as well as the world. And we're going to be talking the 6th of Humanity and Independent India Developing Odyssey. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hand together to welcome the outstanding panel for this evening. Mr. Suresh Babu, who is a director of MIDS, is part of the team with MIDS whom we are organizing. Devesh Kapur is again co-author with Dr. Arvind Subramanian, is a Peterson fellow and former chief economic advisor. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, I think who doesn't know Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, she is a chairperson of MSSRF and also former director general of ICMR. And we also have Mr. Subbarao, who is a former governor of RBI and the chairperson of MIDS. May I request distinguished dignitaries please take their place on the dais. Ladies and gentlemen, my request to extend a warm round of applause to the distinguished panel for this evening. The format of the program for this evening is I will request the President to deliver the formal welcome address. Thereafter, Suresh will set the context. Then we'll formally launch the book, and after that, the speakers will say and interaction, especially in Vedis, then they'll be agreed to take on the questions. Mr. Lakshminarayan is the president of MMA and he's also managing director of Sundaram Home Finance. He's been a great supporter, over 30 years of experience in financial services. Lakshminarayan has held leadership roles in GE Capital, Citibank, and many more. And under him, MMA has grown from leaps and bounds and achieved some new initiatives. I now request you to please deliver the formal welcome to Mr. Lakshminarayan.
Thank you, Group Captain. Good evening, all of you. Distinguished speakers, respected invitees, members of MMA, partners and friends joining us online and in person here. It's indeed a privilege to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this special launch and discussion of the book, A Sixth of Humanity, Independent India's Development Odyssey by Dr. Arvind Subramanian, the Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, Washington, and Dr. Devesh Kapur, Starr Foundation Professor of South Asian Studies and Director of Asia Programs at Johns Hopkins. I'm especially delighted to welcome this evening Dr. D. Subbarao, former Governor of Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chairperson MSSRF and former Director General ICMR, Dr. Suresh Babu, Director at Madras Institute of Development Studies. I also wish to place on record our sincere thanks to MIDS for partnering with MMA in organizing this program with the support of CAS. A warm welcome to all the participants from MMA, MIDS, and our partner organizations who have joined us today, both here at the venue and online. For the benefit of our guests and invitees, allow me briefly to introduce MMA. Established in 1956, MMA has grown into being the largest management association in the country, with over 8,000 members and 12 chapters in Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. We are proud that MMA has been recognized as the best management association in the country 15 times in a row, including the latest year, 24-25. Over the past 4 decades, India's economic dynamism and a progressively more capable state have enabled a significant expansion of infrastructure and basic services, even as gaps and challenges remain. Today, as the world's 5th largest economy, with our share of global GDP having roughly doubled since 2000, India's long experiment in simultaneous nation building, state building, and market building stands at a very crucial inflection point. The visible successes of recent years also bring to the fore serious questions and concerns that merit careful examination. Recent data indicates that India continues to grow at about 7% annually, making it the fastest growing major economy and supporting rapid advances in physical and digital infrastructure. Extreme poverty has declined sharply, with hundreds of millions moving out of deprivation and multidimensional poverty indicators showing meaningful improvement. At the same time, as we build world-class expressways, airports, digital infrastructure, and high-skilled service sectors, there are continuing doubts around the quality of our democracy, the health of federalism, and the balance between high-skilled services and broad-based manufacturing jobs. To help us reflect on these opportunities and contradictions, we are indeed fortunate to have with us this evening such eminent thinkers who have devoted their careers to studying India's development trajectory, not only from an academic standpoint, but also from the vantage point of public policy. Along with all of you present here and those joining through MMA's digital platforms, I look forward to a rich and insightful discussion. I would like to once again thank my colleagues on the managing committee of MMA, our members, distinguished guests from partner organizations, and viewers from India and around the world who are with us for this program. Wish you all a stimulating and a rewarding evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lakshminarayanan. Dr. Suresh Babu is the director of Madras Institute of Development Studies and is applied specialist in macroeconomics and trade and development economics. And he is previously held, he was a professor of IIT Madras and has held academic positions in leading institutions including ISCC Bangalore and Gokhale Institute. And may I request now Suresh Babu to please deliver the formal introductory remarks. Mr. Suresh Babu.
Thank you. Good evening and a very warm welcome. Wet, cold evening. Thank you so much for coming here today for this very important event. An extremely important book, A Sixth of Humanity. I have the privilege of welcoming our authors today, Professor Devesh Kapur, Dr. Arvind Subramanian, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, and of course, my chairman, Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao. Well, I am not going to talk much because authors are here, eminent panelists are here, and my mandate is very limited. What I shall do is to try and provoke your thoughts on what is going to come. So my job is to have a very small curtain raiser on what is going to come from Dr. Arvind and Dr. Devesh Kapur and the panelists. So I shall do that by reading perhaps the concluding section of the book, which I thought was very, very important for our discussions today. I'll start. Quote, "The Indian imagination has come a long way from inefficient public sector enterprises, corrupt, low-quality PWDs, and soft bigotry low expectations. The aspiration now, even if not the achievement, is to build world's best, biggest, tallest, fastest, whether it be statues, idols, temples, bullet trains, train stations, airports, payment systems, or commodity exchanges. Yet, this revolution of rising, even mutinous expectations will be frustrated and turn dangerous if the national project obsesses with the past that can never be settled to the neglect of the only object of collective agency, namely the future India's and the world's that can be rendered promising, especially for its youth. India's real achievements of democracy, order, federalism, and nation building should not be squandered. Averting that tragedy is the matter of collective urgency. Modicum success will allow a sixth of humanity, nearly 1.5 billion aspirational and entrepreneurial Indians to take up the important task of seizing and shaping that future. The book ends here, and I'm also going to end my talk here. So this is just a kind of a very small paragraph of this very important book. I think there will be a formal release, so I don't want to race it and show. I'm sure all of you would have seen. There is also a counter outside from where you can buy this book at a discounted rate with author signature today and only today. So please take advantage of that. And once again, I thank the authors as well as our distinguished panelists to accept our invitation and to come to Chennai and to talk about this book, and above all of you to have assembled here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Suresh Babu. Thank you also for joining MMA to present this great event. We are indeed privileged today. Now we come to the most awaited moment for this evening is we formally launched the book. It has been launched, but we want to take a photo of the book with the author. May I request Lax, you also join me on stage, and may I request you please step forward and do the honor of the book. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Now we have come to the most awaited address by the authors. Before I formally invite the author, Mr. Dr. Devesh Kapur, to please then Arvind Subramanian. May I have the AV of the distinguished panel for this, the author and the panel.
Dr. Devesh Kapur is the Starr Foundation Professor of South Asian Studies and Director of Asia Programs at Johns Hopkins University. A leading scholar of South Asian politics and development, Dr. Devesh previously served at the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Texas at Austin, and Harvard University, and is widely recognized for his award-winning research on migration, development, governance, and higher education. Dr. Devesh holds degrees from IIT Varanasi, the University of Minnesota, and Princeton University. Dr. Arvind Subramanian is a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and former chief economic advisor to the Government of India. Dr. Arvind has held academic and policy positions at Brown University, Ashoka University, the IMF, and the Harvard Kennedy School, and continues to advise the government of Tamil Nadu. A widely published economist and acclaimed author, Dr. Arvind holds degrees from St. Stephen's College, IIM Ahmedabad, and the University of Oxford. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chairperson of the M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation and former Director General of ICMR, is a globally recognized pediatrician and expert in tuberculosis and HIV research, who also served as the WHO's first chief scientist. With over 4 decades of clinical and research experience, Dr. Soumya has played pivotal roles in shaping national and global health policies and continues to advise the Government of India on TB elimination. A fellow of leading science academies worldwide, Dr. Soumya has authored extensive scientific work and holds honorary doctorates from premier international institutions. Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao, Chairperson of MIDS and former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, has held senior leadership roles including Finance Secretary to the Government of India and Secretary to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. A distinguished IAS officer and former lead economist at the World Bank, Dr. Subbarao has contributed extensively to public policy and economic governance. Dr. Subbarao holds degrees from IIT Kharagpur, IIT Kanpur, Ohio State University, MIT, as a Humphrey Fellow, and a PhD from Andhra University.
of as they load the PowerPoint. First of all, good evening, everyone. Devesh and I would first like to extend our gratitude and appreciation to Suresh, Babu, MITS and a friend, and Captain Vijay Kumar and the Madras Management Association for kindly hosting this event. Of course, we're thrilled and delighted to have two such distinguished panelists, Dr. Subbarao and Dr. Swaminathan. And of course, thanks to all of you who have braved the weather to come and attend this session. So thank you all very much. What we'll do is Devesh and I will share and just give you a sense of the book, and then we can have discussion following that. The book, as you can see, is what it is. It's a book that is very big. It has 19 chapters. It covers a lot of material. We try and be interdisciplinary and comprehensive. There's a lot we try and do in the book. But today, what we thought we'd do is, out of the 19 chapters, we thought we'd focus on 4 chapters, largely because these 4 chapters, maybe even more, who have more expertise than Devesh and me, are the panelists themselves, on banking, on fiscal policy, and of course on the whole human capital spectrum, where Dr. Swaminathan is an expert in. So we'll give you a presentation just based on these 4 chapters from the book, give you a sense of what we're trying to say here, and then we can have comments from Dr. Subbarao and Dr. Swaminathan. The 4 chapters we're going to cover are joint family banking, which is a very expressive term used by former Governor Y.V. Reddy to describe public sector banks in India. Then we'll talk about the fiscal state. We talk about the fiscal federalism arrangements, and then human capital. So these are the 4 chapters we focus on. The first thing to note about public sector banks in India is that they've earned consistently low returns after nationalization. Now, one of the things we try to do in the book, throughout the book, is we try and present as much as possible data spanning from 1950 to the latest period, so that you can get a good historical view of what has happened on all these indicators. Here we calculate a measure of performance of public sector banks, which is the return on assets. And this is plotted after 1970 because, as you know, one of the really signature policy changes in India that occurred was in 1969 when Mrs. Gandhi nationalized 14 public sector banks, 14 private banks into public sector banks. So the red line shows the return on assets for the private banks, and the public and the dark line shows the return on assets on public sector banks. Now, in all these things, when you measure performance, there has to be some benchmark. Warren Buffett famously provided a benchmark for banks. He said basically banks that earn a return on assets of about 1.3, they're doing well. And here we wanted to be conservative in our benchmark. We said, okay, let's just take that down and say if the benchmark were 1%, how does the public sector performance, public sector banks compare against that? And what you find, of course, is on average over the 55-year period that we cover, public sector banks earn a return of about 0.3%, which is well short of the 1%. And if you think that the 1% benchmark is too stringent or too tough, we compare it against the private sector banks, which on average earned about 0.8%. So big difference between public and private sector performance. One of the things we say in this chapter is that, this is the kind of assessment of public sector banks that was never really attempted by Indian policymakers over a long period of time. The same thing also for public sector enterprises, which were, of course, much bigger. And part of what we try and say in this book is that why is it that if performance was so consistently poor, why was there not an active intervention or thought on the part of the government to exit from this? So one of the themes of the book is that, getting into the public sector was not an unreasonable choice given the state of the world, given the ideology in the 50s and 60s. But once it was established that, the performance was consistently poor, there were not very many efforts to actually exit from this, say via, privatizing some of the public sector enterprises or the public sector banks. Now, part of the problem, of course, is that this sort of analysis is seldom really done with any great scrutiny, because once you say public sector and say this is the return, people say, but no, public sector, it has this objective and this objective and this objective. You have to take the overall picture. And so once you start doing that, it just blunts any accountability. And that's why, the idea of a joint family enterprise was public sector banking, because nobody knows what the other members of the family are doing, and there's not really any accountability. Because we calculate that if the public sector banks had done what the private sector banks did, every year the central government could have spent 25% more on infrastructure if the public sector had done at least as well as the private sector. Now you might say, no, but public sector has private sector is unencumbered, and therefore this is not a fair comparison. But actually, if you look at it, the onerous regulations in the banking sector, two key ones being priority sector lending, which is that you have to spend a certain share of your lending to small-scale enterprises, agricultural sector, export sector. Those regulations were applied equally to the public sector banks and the private sector banks. Similarly, that banks were forced to hold government securities, what's called the statutory liquidity ratio, was imposed equally in the public and private sector banks. Now, we're not saying that, a strict private-public comparison is totally appropriate, because public sector banks were encumbered otherwise. But still, at least the notion that this should be the starting point for a discussion of what action should be taken was kind of seldom undertaken in India. The other consequences of what happened in banking was that a lot of the functions or the tasks that were imposed on banks, essentially, what we call self-taxation, which is holding government paper, the statutory liquidity ratio, or redistribution, which is the priority sector lending, state capitalism, which is lending to the public sector enterprises. So what you see is that essentially from about 1970 to 2023, these were the predominant activities, or forced to be the predominant activities, of the public sector banks. And as a result, the credit available to the private sector, which is the blue line, was went from about 8 to 25% of GDP. But if you look at it compared to what China or Korea did, I mean, it's a fraction of the credit that was extended to the private sector by banks in those countries. So in a sense, the kind of functions and roles imposed on public sector banks forced or allowed very little credit lending for the commercial sector, and therefore to finance manufacturing and industrialization in India. So, and this was quite a pretty high cost of public sector banking. And essentially, you should have had exit by the government through privatization or some other form of intervention. But in fact, exit has happened, but by private sector agents, depositors, and creditors shifting from public sector banks to private sector banks over time. So, for example, at the time of nationalization, 95% of credit and deposits were held by private sector, public banks, and over time, it's come down to about 60%. So, almost involuntarily, without public sector, any conscious policy action, we have had exit, but only by default. So this is something that we can talk about public sector banks going forward. The other chapter we have is something on the fiscal state. How did the Indian state perform on fiscal policy? And we call this chapter the Kamadhenu fiscal state for a particular reason, and I'll explain that. I keep that as a mystery till the end. The first thing that strikes, and this just came as a surprise to Devesh and me when we did this, was if you look at the average fiscal deficit of central and state governments and average it over 1990 to today, about a 30-year period. And remember, this is the period that India grew very rapidly, amongst the highest in the world. During this period of actually high growth, India's deficit was almost the highest amongst comparator countries. So India's deficit on average exceeded 10%. And if you add in some of the other activities of the state, like lending to public sector enterprises, it's even more. So on average, every year, the Indian state has deficit of 10 to 12%, which is basically means that the Indian state is very weak fiscally and always vulnerable as a result of that. Now, so the two questions we ask in this chapter is, why did this happen? And second, if this happened and India was so much worse than other states, why did India not have repeated crises like other countries like Pakistan, Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, which had much lower deficits than India, and yet those countries experienced repeated financial crises and India didn't. Most famously, after 1991, India has never had a major financial crisis. It had a near crisis in 2013, but has never had a major crisis, whereas all these other countries, many of these countries had much lower deficits, and yet were much more crisis prone. So to the first question of why India had this high deficit is what we call the Kamadhenu fiscal state. Basically, after Kamadhenu, this Kamadhenu state, it suckled all manner of constituencies in India. And we say that this is possibly because of democracy, because the beauty and both the beauty and the challenge of Indian democracy is that, we think that India is kind of driven by particular interests, the government employees, farmers, corporate interests. But actually, if you look at it, these are important vested interests. But actually, almost any interest group in India it can create a clamor for help from the state, and it will get rewarded by the Indian state, either in the form of not being taxed or being excluded from the tax net, or on the expenditure side by being given all manner of subsidies over time. So that's the sense we call this the Kamadhenu fiscal state, that everyone has a right to become a constituency, everyone becomes one. So Indian democracy is like an equal opportunity vested interest creator and sustainer, and the fiscal state responds accordingly. And again, a very surprising thing that we see is that line shows 1990, that after 1991, when India grew very, very rapidly, basically the tax to GDP ratio remained constant. And a lot of this is because every constituency, as I said, was kind of given some, the middle class was exempted from tax, the rich faced no taxation, the poor faced no taxes, landed people who had property faced very limited taxes, rich farmers paid very little taxes, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, you see the red line, you see how expenditures are consistently rising over time. They begin rising after Mrs. Gandhi comes to power and embraces Garibi Hatao and populism. And then, of course, in the 1990s, we get a redistribution. So one of the interesting kind of puzzles, or rather quirks, is that the socialist state in India until 1990 actually was a state which saw rising expenditures, but not, the deficits were actually, as you can see, much lower. Well, I don't have the charts, but basically the composition of spending in this whole period changed from, before 1990, a lot of it was spent on public investment. But in fact, it's only when the economy opened up after 1990, the neoliberal state in India actually becomes the more redistributive state. And that's a kind of interesting quirk that's worth noting. And the last thing about why did we not have crisis? Thing is, we didn't have crises for a whole number of reasons, which we explore in the book. But we did pay a tremendous silent cost, which is that India's interest payments, again, as you can see from the chart, are amongst the highest in the developing world and emerging market world. So what happened was these high deficits and vulnerability didn't translate into crises, but translated into interest absorbing most of the revenues, leaving, that much less money to spend on development expenditures. And so that's the silent cost we've paid for the vulnerability over time that we've seen in India. In fact, interest payments today are much higher than defense expenditures in India, giving you a sense of how much the vulnerability has cost us. The last, I will say just one thing on fiscal federalism, is that every federal country, transfer fiscal resources from poorer to richer regions. From richer to poorer regions. And that's been true in India as well. But that's part of the national compact, because we want, as a nation, expenditure capability and fiscal capability to be roughly, neutralized across states. We don't want poorer parts of the country to not have the resources to try and attempt spending like in the richer states. So that's been rising over time, and that's part of the design feature of nation building and fiscal federalism. Problem today, what we see in fiscal federalism is shown in this chart. We break up the country into 5 regions: North, South, Hindi, Heartland, East, and West. The lines above are the beneficiaries, those who get more by way of transfers than they contribute to the tax kitty, as it were. And you can see that the largest beneficiary, we're leaving aside the Northeast and J&K, which get much, much more than this. We've left that aside, just looking at peninsular India, as it were. You see that the biggest beneficiaries are the Hindi heartland and the eastern states, West Bengal and Odisha. But the interesting thing is, who are the donors as well, the donors or the contributors to this, i.e. those whose contributions exceed transfers. What you find is that although the clamor about unfair fiscal transfers is most evident and most shrill coming from the southern states, and that's the red line. It turns out that the biggest contributors are not the southern states, but the western states of Gujarat and Maharashtra and Haryana in the north. So it is not the case that, it's the south. But the problem of fiscal federalism, if it can be summarized, and I'll hand over to Devesh, is that as you can see these transfers, I think, as I said, all countries have transfers between rich and poor regions. But the problem in India, what's happened is that because of divergent performance between the poorer states and the richer states, it's not the level of transfers that's a source of concern, but that it's been steadily rising over time. As you can see, the beneficiaries are going up. The contributors are also going up in terms of the contributions. So essentially what is happening is the sense that even though the Hindi heartland and states are underperforming by way of lower activity, etc., are consistently underperforming, the fiscal transfer mechanism is not incentivized to penalize that underperformance and reward the performance. So the contributing states, especially the South, feel that, despite their better performance, they are consistently having to cough up resources for the poorer states. And it's that sense that it's open-ended and rising and seeming to feed these perverse incentives that I think is at the heart of the problem and the discontent, the political discontent that we see amongst the southern states. Let's stop there and hand it over to Devesh.
So I'm going to continue what Arvind said, to think about federalism. So normally the usual debate on federalism in India is about centralization, that between tier 1, which is Delhi, vis-a-vis the states. But actually what we show in the book is there's far greater centralization within states. In other words, between tier 2 and tier 3 of government. So this chart shows you the distribution of government employees across 3 levels of the government in the 3 largest countries in the world: China, India, and the United States. What you'll see is that most employees in China and the United States are at the central level and at the local level. India is the opposite. Most employees are at the state level, meaning at tier 2. And one of the reasons, of course, that our local bodies, and especially our urban local bodies, perform poorly is because they are so under-resourced in both staff and finances because of the degree of centralization within states. Now, why that matters is, if you look at federal systems around the world, right, the average subnational population size is usually sort of under 10 million. The exceptions are China and India. However, China, of course, has far greater decentralization to its third tier compared to India. So not only do we have much larger subnational units, but the subnational units are much more centralized than any comparator country around the world, which is why one of the engines of growth, which is these sort of urban areas, cities, that has really underperformed because of lack of resources. And you can see this when you look at revenues of third tier. And again, we compare revenues from land taxes in China and in India. You can see that revenues from land taxes in India have basically been flat and are a fraction of what they are in China. And that much bigger source of local revenues allows urban bodies to, of course, have more investment in the sort of urban structure, sort of infrastructure that helps cities to thrive. Now, the other point, and this is our sort of last slide, is about human capital. And we asked sort of two questions. Why were human capital outcomes poor in the first 4 decades after independence? And when things did improve subsequently, why did they improve on some parameters of human capital, but not in others? So this is just one way of thinking about it. And so some of you know the Human Development Index is an index that incorporates education, health, and per capita income. It was developed by the UNDP. And what this chart shows is India's ranking on that index amongst all countries in the world. So in 1950, India's rank was 63. The lower the rank, the sort of larger the number, the lower the rank of the country. Then by 1990, India's ranking deteriorated and it moved down from 63 to 79. After 1990, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and other schemes, gradually India's position has improved. But even now, it's still ranked, 69 among all countries in the world. So it has undoubtedly improved in the past few decades, but it's still a pretty low ranking in the Human Development Index. Now, this chart, what it shows you is that these improvements differ on different aspects of human capital. So the graph, which looks at infant mortality, so you can see that India's ranking was 74. It again deteriorates to 76. Now it's improved to 63. It's still, Bangladesh does better than India. These rankings are for 3 periods of time, in the 1960s, around 1990, and the mid-2010s. However, when you look at the other chart, which is on child stunting, you see that India does much worse in its rankings on child stunting than it does on infant mortality. And child stunting is still exceedingly high in India, and its ranking has somewhat improved, but really much more marginally relative to the larger improvements in infant mortality. We see something similar when we look at schooling. So schooling, so one chart is about the percentage of like women who have completed 6 years or more of education. And you can see that in India, especially after the mid-1970s, gradually there's been a steady increase in the percentage of like women who have at least completed 6 years of schooling. However, learning outcomes have not only not improved, they've actually declined. And that's the chart on the other chart, which is the expected literacy of women who have completed 5 years of schooling. And what you see is that more and more women are going to school and staying in school, but the learning outcomes have not improved, and in fact may well have even declined. So one of the things that we sort of explore in the book is these differential outcomes and what might sort of explain them. Now, we focus on sort of two plausible explanations. One is there was lack of resources. And to do that, one of the ways we show that is in the chapter on state-owned enterprises. I think for the first time, we've computed what was the actual financial cost of India's state-owned enterprises over from 1960 to now, actually from 1970 to 2020. And what we find is that essentially the sort of losses of state-owned enterprises at the central level and at the state level. The central level, it was about 0.5 to 1% of GDP annually. At the states, it was even larger. And when you look at the opportunity cost of these massive fiscal losses, the opportunity, because the center spends more on infrastructure, the states are responsible constitutionally much more for health. What you can see is that the losses on the state-owned enterprises exceeded their entire health expenditure. Effectively, the health expenditures could have been doubled if they did not have these losses consistently for half a century on state-owned enterprises. But there's a second explanation as well, which is policy priorities. So this is a chart that shows primary, spending on students by states. And what you'll see is that it's not that the richest states, this is from the mid-1960s, that it's not that the richest states spend most. The three southern states, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Andhra, they were in the mid-60s, in the middle of the per capita income, but they had the highest expenditure on primary education, which was a reflection of policy priorities, because of course they were not the richest states. So part of the explanation lies in, you could argue that the entire explanation lies in priorities. If you insist on spending year after year and throwing money down the drain on state-owned enterprises that continue to make losses, you will not have the resources for the necessary public goods that the state is supposed to provide. We'll end there and we'll wait for your answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that was a quick run through of some of the selected themes of the book. And I think now the stage is set for comments from our panelists. We will go in the order. May I now request Dr. Swaminathan to offer her comments?
So, yeah, thank you very much for including me in this very interesting discussion. And I know that in this limited time, you've been able to touch on very limited aspects. It's really a rich source of information, this book. Must congratulate you both, on the extensive research that's been done. And it's a wealth of data, I think, and it's going to take a long time for any of us to read it and digest all the information in it. But thank you also for presenting some of the highlights. And obviously, my interest is, I'm not an economist, so I will not talk about those aspects, but the human capital aspect, which you highlighted, which I have also been very concerned about, the state of human capital today in the country. And given the state of human capital, where are our priorities and where should they be? Of course, it's, I don't have the answer to the question posed historically as to why we did not invest more in primary education or in primary health care, given that most of the countries in our region and Southeast Asia, I think the ones that have done economically very well, they did it, by investing in primary education. I think India had a system for health, at least there was a commitment right from 1946 of trying to provide healthcare to all. But the way that the system evolved, and primary healthcare was a component of this, there was a commitment to universal health coverage. But I think we ended up spending more on tertiary healthcare and building institutions. Obviously, those are also needed to provide care to people who are already sick. I often give the example of Thailand, where I think it was in the early late 90s, where a political party actually, who was actually convinced by public health people and by doctors who have been working in the community. So Thailand had a tradition of doctors interested in primary health care who actually went and stayed in villages and really focused on and living on very poor conditions along with the people and providing health care. They were able to convince a political party to put in their election manifesto what they called the 30 baht scheme, which was at like 30 rupees a year. If you pay, you basically get universal health coverage. But at that time, they also took some difficult decisions, which was that in the next budget, after they came to power, they actually stopped all investment in building bigger hospitals. And they put all their investment for the next 10 years into strengthening their primary healthcare system. And so today, Thailand has really one of the most impressive primary healthcare system. And I've been there to see right from the village level, where somebody who can get peritoneal dialysis at home, high quality, the person can actually live a very good quality of life for a prolonged period, to the different levels of healthcare and how the referral works. And they invested in institutions. So I think one of the lessons that I take away from this is, firstly, how do you prioritize? You need also, it has to be based on evidence and science and informed by experts. But ultimately, there'll have to be a political push. And sometimes the decision would have to perhaps be a bit shocking. I mean, I'm sure it was shocking for the Thai public that there will be no more development of tertiary institutions for a matter of 10 years. So you need that. And you also need to be tracking and monitoring what is happening to your data and what is the trend. So I think this whole process of learning from data, India has, of course, been, for a long time, we've been lauded for the quality of our data. We've had very good systems and institutions. But using that data to learn, we do the National Family Health Surveys every 5 years, for example. There's enough opportunity to make course corrections. And it has been done. It's not that nothing was done. There was the National Health Mission, which was launched in 2005, which is when the whole concept, again, of the community health workers, the ASHAs, and so on, to try to strengthen that primary healthcare delivery. But I think we're still far away from that. One of the issues, I think, is the state and center, and health falls actually in the concurrent list. So it becomes a state responsibility. And therefore, if it is a state responsibility, then I think we need much more decentralization to the state level. But I totally agree with you that I think one of the things that's holding us back is the lack of the fiscal devolution to the third level of governance, along with accountability and responsibility for delivery of services. So most of the panchayats, except for exceptions like Kerala, I think really don't play much of a big role in the social sector. They're not involved in monitoring how health or education is being delivered. They're not creating the demand, and therefore even the planning that they do is very lackadaisical. It's not based really on the needs. And we've had some recent experience in Odisha of working with panchayats across one district, trying to develop a model Gram Panchayat development plan. But we found it was an uphill task because they'd never really taken it seriously and done it. Neither do they have any expectations that even if they develop a good plan, that they will get the resources actually to meet those. So it's a chicken and egg situation. But I think we can learn obviously from, so can states learn from other states? Why do we have to take so many years and repeat all the mistakes? How to devolve power to panchayats and local urban bodies? Well, we have the example of Kerala. Similarly, Tamil Nadu has built a very good public health system. Not that we can't do better in Tamil Nadu. Yes, we can, but other states could learn. Here we've built a very good medical, centralized medical supply division, the central procurement, which saves so much of money when you actually do pooled procurement and you increase the volumes of drugs that you're procuring. You can significantly bring down the price. And the Tata Memorial Hospital recently has shown through their cancer grid program that by pooling requirement from cancer, small cancer hospitals around the country, they were able to reduce 85% the cost of cancer drugs. So we have these models which actually work. Similarly, learning outcomes. I think learning from between states is, and a couple of other points. I was talking about institutions, and I think it's extremely important that we do not just a scheme-oriented, program-oriented approach, and if we feel that things are not well, okay, just scrap the scheme and launch a new scheme. I think that we have seen doesn't really help. You need very strong institutions, whether it's regulatory system, our regulatory institutions really need to be strengthened much further. India is a pharmacy of the world. And if we have to keep that reputation of being the pharmacy of the world and do even better, then unless our central drug controller regulator is considered the best in the world, WHO does have a ranking system for regulatory agencies. And we're not at that top tier level yet. And therefore, for people to have faith in our safety and quality of our drugs and vaccines, we have to obviously have a very strong regulatory system which has to be science-based. Similarly, the food safety regulator. Today, I think unhealthy food is one of the big risk factors for health. If our food safety regulators are not implementing strictly the front of pack labelings, taking action on advertising against, anybody can advertise anything today and claim anything. So unless there is a strong regulator who actually takes action, you will continue to see the increase in unhealthy food and having an impact on our health, obesity, and all of these things. So institutional strengthening is important. The second thing is preventive care as well. I think one of the things that you showed in your book is the stunting rates in India. Stunting is low height for age. And while our life expectancy has improved significantly, what is not improved is healthy life expectancy. So how many years of life do we live with chronic illness? That is a significant amount. So average life expectancy today is around 70, 72. But healthy life expectancy is about 10 years less. It's only about 60. So that means there's a huge burden on the individual, the family, as well as on the health system ultimately, because of the burden of illness. So we're not doing enough to prevent that burden of disease. That means you have to focus on prevention. And prevention essentially means you have to provide, clean air, clean water, sanitation, nutritious diet, good housing. So what are called the social determinants of health. So I think an analysis will show that investing more in prevention, and if you look at our health expenditure, not only is it well below what was committed in the National Health Policy 2017, it was committed that India would reach 2.5% of GDP expenditure on health. That is from the government. Because otherwise what happens today is out-of-pocket expenditures is still very high. And when you have out-of-pocket expenditure, then, it's basically driving people who are already just above the poverty line into poverty. It's the biggest health expenditures are the biggest driver of sudden catastrophic expenditure resulting in a huge loss of financial resources for the family, but also you cannot provide ongoing quality care. So investing in institutions, for example, that will develop those policies. Thailand again has an Institute for Health Policy and Health Promotion. And what they do is very clever. They use the taxes from tobacco, alcohol, and even from sugary beverages. So whatever they call a sin tax, they take that and they put it into an institution which is actually working towards health promotion. And the state then adopts those policies because it's developed by experts. So maybe I'll stop at this point with these comments.
Thank you, Dr. Soumya. Would you like to? Okay, yeah. So now, may I invite Dr. Subbarao to offer some comments? Please.
It's wonderful to be here. at this book event, A Sixth of Humanity. Alexander the Great, after he conquered the known world, he worried that there were no more lands to conquer. Similarly, prospective writers who want to write books on India will worry that there's nothing more to write, because Arvind and Devesh have covered almost everything and everything that needs to be said about India. When Arvind told me 2 years ago that Devesh and he were going to write this book, I wondered how they were going to capture the complexity and diversity of the India story over the last 75 years into a comprehensive narrative, and explain that. In the event that they've done an amazing job in helping us understand India over the last 75 years, provide answers to questions that we normally ask, even provoke questions that we didn't think we could ask. And great job. The Financial Times has chosen this book as one of the best books of 2025. So congratulations to Arvind and Devesh. What I want to do over the next 15 minutes given to me is say three reasons why you must read this book. Then I'll comment about 3 issues and I'll ask 3 questions. Actually, I've made notes for 45 minutes. I don't know how far I will go, but let's see how far I'll go. The first reason, there are many reasons you must read this book, but the first reason is that this book explains not just how things happened, but why they happened the way they did. There are hundreds of books on India. They're all written from a specialist viewpoint, either history or economics or political science or whatever. But there are very few books which combine a variety of disciplines and explain not only how things happened, but why they happened. So this book blends disciplines of history, political science, economics, explains why things happened the way they did, and importantly, they don't make assertions. They back everything they say by data and analysis. The Kamadhenu of fiscal state that Arvind spoke about, I just want to illustrate what I said with that example. Democracies are supposed to be ruled by majority. But in practice, they're a coalition of vested interests. And this coalition of vested interests militates against the common interest, and that's what they show in this book. Arvind talked about all the vested interests garnering the benefits of taxation, all the vested interests garnering the benefits of public expenditure. Why does that happen? Because the state is a Kamadhenu state. So the first reason you must read this book is they explain why things happen the way they did. The second reason you must read this book is they explain some of the developments that run counter to conventional theory. Again, take for example divergence across states that both Arvind and Devesh spoke about. In theory and in practice, there should be no divergence across states in a large country. Where in a large country, interregional disparity should decline over time. We've seen this happen in many large countries. Why does that happen? That happens because of free movement of people, goods, services, finance, ideas across borders of states. So interstate, interregional disparities should decline over time, and that's what happened in many large countries. In fact, the secret to American success is the free labor mobility. People moved where jobs were. They moved to California when there were jobs there, then they moved to Texas, they're moving elsewhere now. But that's not happened in India. In India, disparities have actually increased over time. And actually, what I liked about the book is they go into granular detail and explain some of the things that happened in our own country. Take, for example, Punjab and Haryana. One state until, I think, the mid-1970s. And same institutions, same culture, same traditions, same natural resource endowments. But Haryana is today the richest state in the country, and Punjab has regressed. Why does that happen? The Bimaru states, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and UP, over the last 25 years since that phrase has been coined, Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh have moved out of that capture. But UP and Bihar still remain there. Bihar is the poorest state in the country, as they showed in the chart. And UP has huge untapped potential. Why has that happened? West Bengal, once the frontier state in the country, capital of colonial India, most industrialized state. Today it is a laggard. Kerala, a very unique model. Kerala has no agriculture, as they say, no agriculture, no manufacturing, no services, but still the best human resource indicators of the country. In fact, Kerala economy is more linked to the Gulf economy than to the Indian economy. So this chapter on what they call India's succeeding and failing uniquely is a wonderful chapter, very, very revealing. So that's the second reason you must read this book, because it explains why developments in India have gone against conventional theory and against textbook understanding. The third reason, and this in my view is the most important reason why you must read this book, is that they take a bold stand. They're not afraid to take an unconventional, unorthodox stand. Somebody told me that you should never ever make a statement that a reasonable person cannot disagree with. You should never ever make a statement that a reasonable person cannot disagree with. By that test, this book passes that test eminently. For example, disparity across state. Arvind spoke about that. There is, in every country, in every federation, there are grants and devolutions from the higher level to the lower levels of government. That happens in all federations in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in South Africa, in Nigeria. It happens in India too. And we justify that saying that there should not be wide variations across countries. There should be cross-subsidization. So it's okay for developed states to contribute to developing states. For example, today, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, they get much less than a rupee for every rupee they contribute to the center tax pool. They get much less than a rupee. States like UP and Bihar, for every rupee they contribute to the center's tax pool, they get much more. That's okay. That's understandable that there should be a cross-subsidization in one country. But what does it do? It creates a moral hazard that lower levels of government lose the urge or the push to raise their own resources, which is what Arvind was talking about. But people don't talk about this because it is a holy cow. You have to say that you have to subsidize poorer states. I'm from Andhra Pradesh, and 30 years ago when NTR was our chief minister, we had the panchayat elections after many, many years. I think there were about 15,000 panchayats. So after the elections, we had somebody advised the chief minister, sir, you must call all the panchayat presidents for a convention. So there were about 15,000 freshly elected panchayat presidents meeting the chief minister. Wonderful opportunity. And we wrote notes for the CM saying, sir, you must tell panchayat presidents to tell them to raise their own resources. Because raising their own resources actually improves accountability. I remember, many of you may not remember, but 30 years ago in West Bengal, they said for every patient that comes to a government hospital, we'll collect 2 rupees. 2 rupees is a small amount. It's a small amount today. It was a small amount even 40 years ago. But people raised hue and cry, how can you collect 2 rupees? But actually what happened was when people paid the 2 rupee fee, it increased their accountability. They could demand service. That we are paying 2 rupees, we demand service. So similarly, panchayats must collect their own taxes. So in NTR's notes, we wrote, sir, you must tell panchayat presidents to raise their own taxes in addition to what we're going to give. Devesh spoke about how we're not giving money to the third tier. We're not giving enough money, but the third tier also must raise its own money. What the panchayat president said? You think we got elected to raise money? No, we got elected to spend money. So you must give us the money. Okay. So that's the third reason I think you should read this book, because in this book, Arvind and Devesh call this a moral hazard. As much as you must cross-subsidize, but the limits to this and what happens because of this devolutions from the top is that there is no pressure on lower levels of government to raise their own taxation. Most people, fiscal experts, say that taxation powers have been taken away from lower levels of government. That is not true. There are still enough avenues for lower levels of government to raise taxes. They don't want to do it because they want the pleasure of spending without the pain of taxation. And this is an unconventional, bold statement they make in the book. So these are the three reasons why, three of the many, many reasons why you must read this book. Now, very quickly, I want to touch on three issues. The first is fiscal consolidation and macroeconomic stability. They asked the question, why have markets not punished India like they punished Pakistan or Argentina or Brazil or Turkey? As Arvind explained, it is not true that they're not punished India. We've been punished. In 1991 balance of payments crisis, we were punished. In 2013 taper tantrums crisis, when I was the governor, we were nearly punished. And the reason we did not get into a big crisis is that we did not commit as much of a sin as Pakistan or Argentina did. But one thing I want to say on this occasion is that, fiscal consolidation has improved since I was finance secretary, has improved since Arvind was chief economic advisor, but we cannot declare victory. We still have a lot of way to go in order to declare victory on fiscal consolidation. The central government has done reasonably well over the last 5-6 years on fiscal credibility. Debt to GDP ratio has come down, but it is still 60%. The FRBM committee said it must be 40%. As Arvind said, interest payments of the central government and state governments, they're the largest single item of expenditure in every budget. They're the fastest growing item of expenditure in every budget. So to believe that we've beaten fiscal consolidation, we've reached there is not correct. A lot of people say that, our debt to GDP ratio is low. Look at Japan, look at the US, look at the UK, look at Europe. Their debt to GDP ratios, Japan is 250%. Most European countries, America, they're all above 100%. Our debt to GDP is only about 60% now, or whatever. Perhaps 88.
India is about 65, no, 70, it's close to 75.
Close to 75 center and state. So it's 80, actually 80, I think, is much higher. Our debt to GDP ratio is, quite low compared to rich countries. But actually, that is not a safety indicator because we can get into a debt trap at a much lower debt to GDP ratio. I urge all of you to actually read Arvind's dissent note to the FRBM committee where he explained why we must continue to worry about our debt to GDP ratio. On this issue, it's also important to look at the states. Most people I meet, they say, lots of people come to India, these investment banks. We went to India and studied the situation. Where did you go? We went to Delhi, went to Mumbai. I tell them that Delhi and Mumbai are not India. India is a large country, there's states. And if you look at, even for this, even fiscal deficit, people look at the central fiscal deficit, central fiscal consolidation. But what matters collectively for our macroeconomic stability is the combined fiscal stance of the center and states. There's actually a 60-40 picture which they show in the book, which is that if you take the total expenditure, first let's talk about taxation. If you take the total taxation of the center and states, the central government collects about 60% of the combined tax and states collect 40%. 60% central government, 40% states. If you take the combined expenditure, the center gets to spend 40%, states get to spend 60%. So what's happening is states collect 40% of taxation, get to spend 60%. Center collects 60% of the tax, gets to spend 40%. So the state's collective fiscal stance is actually as important, if not more important, than that of the center. The last thing people say about fiscal consolidation is, we borrow only in rupees. We don't borrow in foreign currency. We are safe. That is not a safety indicator. It is true that the government borrows only a small amount in foreign currency, but as an economy, we borrow in foreign currency. We have a current account deficit, which means that a lot of foreign money is coming in. We need foreign capital. So to believe that the government borrows in rupees, therefore we are safe, is also incorrect. President Hoover, I think he said, blessed are our children because they shall inherit our debt. That's the case in India now. We're passing on the burden of debt to future generations. I'll take 7 minutes more. Okay. The second issue I want to talk about is freebies. They talk about this in the Kamdenu state. There's competitive populism. Over the last 2 years, we've seen this in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Delhi, Karnataka, most recently in Bihar, political parties competing with each other about freebies. We saw in Bihar most blatantly. They stretched credibility when the Mahagathbandhan said that they will give a job to every household. They'll give 30,000 rupees to every woman in the state. People stop believing it and they neutralize each other. If every party offers it, the political impact is minimized. The point is, I admit that in a poor society where millions struggle for daily existence, some freebies are necessary. You must provide some safety nets. But the spending that we do at the state level and at the central level on freebies, I think is crossing limits, especially because this is not out of revenue surplus. This is borrowed money that is being given away. Again, as I said, it is a debt that we are passing on to our children. Instead of a surplus, we're passing on a burden of debt to the children. Ideally, a loan should repay itself. If you take a house loan or a loan to educate your daughter, the benefit of the loan repays itself. Your daughter gets educated, she earns, she can repay the debt. But if you borrow money only to give away freebies, that's unsustainable. Actually, it's soft bribing. And every political leader who says that I will give freebie is actually saying, I'm sorry, I cannot give you the dignity of a decent life, regular livelihood, and regular income. So I'm giving you this, please make do with it. The last thing, why do people vote for freebies? Like I said, they're neutralizing each other. But if you dig deep, why are people getting enticed by this? It's very rational to do that. When they lost confidence in politicians, when credibility of politicians is very low, it is rational for people to vote for freebies because it is something that I get today. I'm not going to get anything tomorrow. I might as well take what I'm getting today. The third issue I want to talk about is this divergence between rich states and poor states. I would have said north-south, but I just got corrected by Arvind, which is that it is west and south versus Hindi heartland. They actually divide them into 6 categories. We actually, do it in terms of north and south. 30 years ago, I'm old enough to look back 30 years ago, when we started the 1991 reforms, the Economist wrote an article saying that India is going to be divided into an east-west divide. The eastern part of the country, which flourished on the back of public investment, is now going to go down because India is opening up to markets. States which have been always entrepreneurial in the west and in the south are now going to benefit, and therefore the east-west disparity will go up. India will divide across an east-west line. That did not actually happen. What we are seeing today is actually west and south versus the rest of the country. And again, as I said, some cross-subsidization is necessary. can be supported. But the question is, are we reaching the limits of this? I was struck that last year, the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh urged his people to have more children. We told Andhras that you must have more children. Here in Tamil Nadu, the Chief Minister Stalin urged Tamil people to have more children. I didn't think I would ever see that day, because when I joined the service 50 years ago, everything, no matter what job you had, everything that we did was family planning, whatever you did. Okay? Even if you're a controller of weights and measures, you were in some sense doing family planning. Our thing was that you must encourage, this is a national campaign, you must work on family planning. I didn't think I would ever see a day when a chief minister will tell his people have more children. And why they're doing that, the subtle message is actually not have more children. What their actually message is that we're losing out. We're losing out. Our populations are growing much slowly. Population growth rates have come down. We're losing out vis-a-vis states where population growth rates are still high. Therefore, we must have our own children. And what's worrying and will become a big issue next year after the census, they'll talk about it in the book, is that there is going to be revision, delimitation of parliament constituencies, whereby southern states, western states might lose disproportionately in terms of parliament seats. So what we're going to see is southern states, western states being asked to continue to cross-subsidize poorer states and at the same time lose political clout. It's a double whammy. How we're going to manage that issue is going to be a big problem. So I've talked about three issues. Those who are keeping count will know that I talked about fiscal consolidation. I talked about disparity across states, the freebies, and I talked about the division, the divide across states. Now, very quickly in 1 minute, three questions I want to ask you, Arvind and Devesh. First question, what explains the Modi mystique? Okay. Is he just lucking out? Or has he done something that appeals to the vast majority of the voters, that is getting elected 12 years in a row, actually an unprecedented record? So what explains the Modi mystique? The second question is, what explains Modi's timidity about economic reforms? Yeah, Arvind wrote a wonderful article in Foreign Affairs, I think, last year, saying that Modi is more inclined towards welfareism than structural reforms. But going beyond that, Modi as Prime Minister has had more political capital than any Prime Minister in India. Certainly any recent Prime Minister, but probably any Prime Minister in India. Why? What makes him so timid? Why is he not investing his political capital in pushing reforms? And third, where's India's growth going to come from? People are going to say that we are actually growing at 8.2%. I don't know if that is a structural shift to an 8% or whether it is a quirk. But over the long term, we want to be 2047 a developed country. And the people, Professor Bhanumurthy and others have done the numbers. They say we must grow at 8% consistently over the next 22 years if we want to be a developed country by 2047. Can we actually maintain 8% growth 22 years, year on year? Over the last 35 years, India has clocked growth of 8% plus just 3 times. And we never ever been able to maintain that for more than 2 consecutive years. So is it possible for this country, for this economy, to grow at 8+% for the next 22 years for India to be a developed country? So once again, my best wishes for the success of the book. Many congratulations. You've done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. And very important and pertinent questions. Please.
So my questions is, what can we do now? What should we do to prevent our demographic dividend from turning into a demographic disaster? Because clearly, if we don't focus on early childhood nutrition and education, we're not going to have people to make a developed country. And the second is, what have the World Bank and IMF had a role to play in any of the things that you describe in the book where we have not done what we should have done? I mean, the questions that you ask as to why certain decisions were made, were we influenced by the banks?
Okay, so now we invite the authors for their brief responses.
So why don't you start? And then I come in about, we'll talk about activity, about reform. Yes. Dr. Subbarao.
First, thank you so much to both of you for your very thoughtful remarks. Asking the question about what explains the Modi mystique is like asking the question, what explains the Trump mystique? I think that to me a little bit it's almost the opposite. I mean,
Okay.
but I think mystique, charisma, these are somewhat indefinable characteristics of individuals, right? Because it's like, why do some film stars become big, right? And it's hard to understand charisma, mystique, but let me offer you one explanation. Is sometimes you do well not because you are great, but because your opponents are so terrible. I don't have to be very good if my opponent is even worse, right? And I think at least part of the success is because the opposition, leaders in the opposition, how many inspire credibility in the public? I think one part of the success, and it's something that we did a little bit, in a place like the US, in the West in general, if you are single as a politician, it's a political liability. In the US, you can elect anyone, but even if you're gay, you will get elected if you have a partner. But if you are single, you are seen. In developing countries, it's the opposite. Being single is a plus point because the assumption is you will not make money for your family. To the extent that most of our political parties are no different from family-owned businesses. To that extent, I think being single, having weak opponents is not the full explanation, but might be part of the explanation. On the timidity part, I think the one spectacular failure set back the attempts at reforms, which was the one on farm laws. That was, I mean, when you look at the changes, many of them were actually had some reasonable basis and were positive. But agriculture is a state subject. If a center intrudes on state rights without due consultation, without building consensus, it should not be surprised if there's a backlash. And as you know, they withdrew and they got so worried about the negative political fallout that it really, my understanding is, made them much more timid going forward. And to some extent, I mean, I hate to say it, but we really need to thank President Trump for what he's done, because now you see certain actions. And as you know, people are realizing at the sector that the world is getting to be a much tougher place. I mean, the global environment is deteriorating. Let me come back to your questions after Arvind answers, and then I'll.
On the Modi mystique, let me just add a couple of things to what Devesh said. I think, firstly, Thank you for wonderful comments, and maybe in future, Dr. Subbarao, maybe you should be presenting the book rather than us. You know it better than certainly we do. See, I think that, remember, the Modi mistake has to be analyzed over time. So you have to ask, what was the origin of the Modi mistake, and then what is the sustenance of the Modi mistake? And these could potentially be two, there could be different explanations. And on the origin of the Modi mistake, I think that's kind of less surprising because, at that point, there was a sense that things were out of control, corruption, the whole thing. So I like to say that kind of there's a straight line from Pranab Mukherjee to the rise of Modi, because he mishandled the economy so much, and that period generally, and that. I think, to be fair, on the sustenance of the Modi mistake, I don't just think it's negative. You've also worked, I've worked closely with him. For all his faults, right, the sense that, at least in the first term of his administration, the sense that here was a man actually committed to doing stuff, following up, kind of engaged in this business of how much was optics, how much was, actual reality. I can say there was a fair amount of substance to that as well. I mean, for example, as you know, I'm not I'm not a buck by any means, as you know, but, it would be amazing. He would say, call a meeting at 11 at night, and then the meeting would disperse and say, Saab, मैं सुबह 6 बजे आने के लिए तैयार हूं, मैं अहमदाबाद जाके आ जाऊंगा, आप लोग तैयार हैं कि नहीं, so that sense that he had this commitment to his project, and we can all debate about whether the project, what the elements of it which are positive and which are negative, but I think there is that sense that, and also remember, compared now even to Trump today, that the concern for macroeconomic stability was always something that he embraced. He did believe in fiscal, consolidation, does believe in low inflation, which I can personally vouch for. So there were some objectively, I think, positive attributes also, which contributed at least to the sustenance. But I think over time, you can see that's fading. Partly, I think there's just staleness. I think the beauty about democracy is that, the guys have to be thrown out, not even because they're incompetent, but they become stale and, run out of ideas. That's what I used to say. So that's, I think, the Modi mistake. Now, what explains the timidity? So first, I think we have to note the fact that, off late, the GST reform, the labor codes, I mean, there is some action which, as Devesh rightly said, has been spurred by the crisis abroad. That let me offer 2 or 3 ideas about why he's been timid about political reform. One was, someone told me early on before, and I think this is true, that in terms of his mindset and his conviction, he was always much better at implementation than at policy. This was always true about him, right? And therefore, the sense that, how do I get things done and focus on that, he was very good at. But, that if you reform this, or you need to maintain a stable environment, or you have to have rule of law, all these are more alien concepts too. So that's kind of an instinctive thing about that. The second, of course, is the other side of his personality, which is, demands loyalty and stuff. The price you pay is that you lose talent and expertise, and you get only, the premium on loyalty over expertise, which you can see has been rising over time, which also means that therefore, it's a problem. The last thing I would say on the timidity about political reform, this is one of the sad parts, is that, and I'll give you a personal experience in government that I had when I was there, that, we were arguing about the urgency for reform, especially the cleanup of the banking system, in 2015, 2016. And, or fiscal consolidation or whatever. Finally, the punchline would come back. Why all this urgency? We're growing at 7% in any case. So the fact of the growth numbers, I believe they're highly overstated. But given that people felt the economy was growing, and this would be thrown back at me, saying, "What are you talking about? So what if we don't reform? We'll still grow at 6%, 7%, 8%." And so the whole, data quality, the deleterious effect it had on policy is I think another thing that should be. Where is India's growth going to come from? Yeah.
Foreign investment. They said that what do you have? Got more committed to welfare schemes giving away doors rather than doing structural reform which will take India to a higher growth. And exactly the point that why should I do that if I'm already growing at 7%?
Exactly. And that played a key role. And then see, because then what the new welfarism did, and you can see that it's like Marx said, religion is the opium of the masses. Now the welfare state means that there's a certain level of stability that you can take for granted and keep restiveness in check. So in some ways it's a master stroke. You create the illusion that you're growing at 7-8% and you protect against the downside by having a welfare state, which then, so it's like a perfect combination. Now, where is India's growth going to come from? It's also something that I think I will tie into the demographic dividend, and Devesh, then you can talk about the role of the World Bank and IMF. See, I actually think that India is, not growing at these high rates at all. And because if you look at all the other indicators, private investment has been flat for such a long time. FDI has been declining. Consumption growth has been weak. So a series of indicators suggest that the economy is maybe not as robust as the headline numbers are indicating. So I do think we need a serious effort at reviving growth. Now, just to put it in the current context, people think, there are two schools of thought broadly. One is the next phase is services. Services is going to be the engine of growth. Now, the problem with that is twofold, right? Even if a services-led model succeeded, it would provide growth and opportunities for 1 to 2% of the labor force. So if you look at the PLFS, for example, the share of people doing these high-tech IT thing is 1 to 2. So by definition, it cannot be inclusive growth. By definition. So therefore then, and also people forget, this is the thing, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's actually a double whammy for India because it is replacing or threatening to replace exactly those kind of tasks, which now we have comparative advantage in, cheap coding, cheap back office stuff. And so that cannot be. I remain firmly of the view that, and I'll tell you what the problem with this is, that we have to take one last stab at reviving manufacturing in India, and the China plus one opportunity was actually providing this until the Trump tariffs came. I hope the Trump tariffs can be addressed at least in the medium term, but we cannot give up on manufacturing at all. Just to illustrate that with numbers, China's share of low-skill global exports is about 45 to 50%. India's share is about 3 to 4%. India will never go to 20% global export market share. We'll never do this. But there is no reason why, given what's happening recently, Foxconn coming in, Vietnamese investors coming in, Tata is doing so well, India's own manufacturing doing so well, that we can't raise that from, say, 3% to 10, 12%. That would itself provide a boost to inclusive growth, even if today and going forward, a unit of manufacturing growth will not give you the same employment as in the past because of robots and things like that. Because robots are now, what AI is doing to services, robots is also doing to manufacturing. So that we can't escape. But it still offers us, the hope of, some hope of salvaging the inclusive growth. Because unless we have inclusive growth, it can't be sustained growth. And it kind of speaks to Soumya's question that the demographic dividend I mean, we have to do all the human capital that Soumya quite rightly emphasized. But unless we provide jobs for these people coming out of where the demographic dividend is especially high, like, the Hindi heartland, unless we provide reasonably well-paying formal sector jobs and create these employment opportunities, we will remain an economy which basically over 40 years has gone from informality to informality. It's just that the sector and the location of the informality has changed from manufacturing and rural to services and urban, but we haven't quite provided mass, well-paying manufacturing jobs.
So just to add, with a slight difference with Arvind here, that I don't think so we should see services and manufacturing as either or. If you are 1/6 of humanity, you need every engine. And it can't be either or. And even in services, IT is just one part. Construction, tourism, for instance. I mean, you talked about Thailand. Thailand gets way more international tourists than India. Why is that the case? And tourism is a very labor-intensive sector. So I think we need to really think about that growth needs to come from a range of options rather than A or B. I mean, I think we have to think like that. The point you raised about the demographic dividend becoming a demographic disaster. I mean, one of the puzzles we have in the book, which we ask is, India has not been blessed with, say, great natural resources other than coal. No oil, there's no gas, there are no rare earths. But the one thing the country has in excess clearly is people. That's why you're 1/6 of humanity. And yet it is the one thing we have so severely underinvested since independence. There is absolutely no doubt that we have so severely, so even now, for instance, I also work on higher education, you'll always see minister talking about, look, how much our gross enrollment ratio has increased. Actually, India severely over-invests in higher education. India's gross enrollment ratio relative to its per capita income is a complete outlier. Most countries that we know, whether China, Korea, Taiwan, or Germany, etc., achieved those gross enrollment ratios at per capita incomes that were 3, 5, 10 times higher. So, of course, the result is that we have so focused on quantity that we've totally forgotten anything about quality. So most higher education simply doesn't have the signaling value. The vast majority of the students, we are doing them a severe disservice because they're getting credentials, which raises expectations, but virtually no skills like for labor markets. And they will be unwilling to work in blue-collar jobs because they have a degree, but they simply do not have the skills, especially the way the technology is sort of moving. You asked the question, did the IMF and the World Bank play any role? One area that the bank clearly played a role was in the push on primary education. So during the 80s, and you might remember, India's share in IDA began to come down because China had joined. And, India tried to protect its share, etc. And gradually the bank began to say, your IDA share lending will not continue if you don't agree to take for primary education. Then what happened was that the World Conference on Education was held, I think, in Bangkok. It might have been Chiang Mai in the early 90s. And the report that came out prior to the conference showed that India had by far the largest number of illiterates in the world. And the fact is, unless we are shamed in the global context, that forced the bureaucracy and the political leadership to really think much more about primary education. So you see, that was one sort of impetus that comes. It's very clear that primary education was one sector. The health has been much more, because it's much more in the hands of the states, and there the role has been much, much weaker.
Can I just, on the role of the World Bank and the IMF, it's actually interesting, and this, we write about this in the book, that the direct role spoken about, the direct role of the IMF in the 91 crisis was also thing. But the indirect way it's been very influential is Dr. Subbarao is an example of that, but there are many, many like that. If you look at the team of reformers in 1991, leading up to 1991, so many of them spent their time in the Bretton Woods institutions. And I would argue that the amazing thing about that team, that there was a critical mass of people in the bureaucracy who had spent a lot of time, Monte Ahluwalia, Shankaracharya, Rakesh Mohan, Dr. Subbarao, Arvind Virmani, all of these. So in that sense, the exposure via their locating in the World Bank and the IMF, obviously all these reforms were homegrown, but one shouldn't neglect the broader indirect impact of many of those ideas and people that they made to the Indian reforms of 1991. I just want to end with one last thing. I think Dr. Subbarao made a really very, very deep and nice point, asking, why are people enticed by freebies, right? You ask, and your answers, I think, very compelling. People say, look, we can't trust the government to give us health education. Yeah, whatever bird in hands. But Dr. Subbarao, I would just complete that by saying that that is also true from the side of the government and thing. They also, I think, have given up or think that, some of these things are too challenging, like health and education. So it's also, in a sense, an abdication by them that, or an acceptance that, so it's kind of a mutual equilibrium between those who know that the government can't provide, let's take the bird in hand, and the government in turn kind of fatalistically accepting that, it won't be able to deliver, so it can smile. So it's kind of a happy equilibrium between citizens and government, as it were.
It's happy.
Happy for the two parties, but for the country,
okay,
I think it's
not happy.
Yeah.
Can I just make one comment on education?
Yeah.
I don't know much about health, but education, you make comments, and Soumya, you also spoke about more government spend. The challenge in private education is because enrollment, retention, and achievement levels. Now, when I was working in the 40 years, 34 years ago, our biggest challenge was getting children to schools. If I went to a village in a jeep at 11 o'clock in the morning, children must be in school. There'd be hundreds of children following the jeep because they're not going to school. And we asked the parents, why are you not going through that? You're not sending your child. They just get us the answers. Today we've solved that. 100% achievement. Then retention was a problem in the mid-80s, 90s, especially girls were dropping out of school. We realized one of the problems was toilets. Toilets for girls. So we spent huge amounts on building toilets for schools. We solved that problem. And one of the things I'm very proud about India is the midday meal program. No country has ever done anything like this. The midday meal program has been a great thing in getting children and retaining them in schools. I think when MGR started that first year, Kamraj first started here, probably I heard the stories about MGR. Some of these multinationals came to him and said, why do you want to send food? It's much easier. We'll prepare biscuits, nutritious biscuits, and you can send them. It's very easy to transport. MGR said, no, nothing doing. I'm going to give a hot meal to every child. Much more difficult 30, 40 years ago than it is today. But I'm very proud of what India does. And the midday meals program has been one of the biggest pushes for retaining children in schools. What we've not solved is the achievement level. Okay? And Pratham and all, we all hear about that. All of you talked about the amounts we spend on education and health. I know the numbers. World Bank says 6%, 4%, whatever. Yesterday, we had a seminar in CES in Hyderabad, and Montek gave a lecture. One of the panelists, one of the audience said, in Telangana government, today spends 1.03 lakh rupees per child on primary education. 1,03,000 rupees, that's by no means small. 1,03,000 rupees per child per year on schooling. That's not small. The problem, I think, is beyond money. Not just how much we spend, but how well we spend that money. What are we doing to get achievement levels higher up?
I mean, just to, on that, there is one, at least on this, there is a demographic dividend possibility. The number of school-going children, or the number of children in the school-going age group peaked in 2015. From now on, it will be a steady decline, which means that the quantity issue has been addressed. We now have the opportunity to focus on quality.
But I think Dr. Subbarao thinks that even today, the resources are there. Yeah. So
Right.
it's the translate that into
Spending the money,
exactly.
spending money,
Yeah.
but we're not spending. Sri Lanka spent less per capita than we on education, and their education achievement levels are much higher.
And what Devesh is saying is that as the denominator declines, the resources per subject will increase even more.
1 lakh will become 2
Yeah, but the fundamental thing still remains.
Yeah, I think all good things have to come to an end. We have a lot of questions, I think, online, but I don't think we have the time to answer those questions. So we will have to wind up now. But I'm sure such an important book, such a big book, such a massive work on Indian economy will raise a lot of issues, especially for young researchers to take up some of these issues, ponder a lot more on the future research ideas as well as on the future of growth in Indian economy. May I now invite Captain to
Thank
say.
you, sir. What a intellectually enriching. I know each one of you have gone, more 681 viewers are watching the program live. It's not gone down. There are really so much input, and they continue to watch. A lot of questions, but unfortunately, due to time, not able to take it. We are going to give you more books for you to read, sir. This is a book published by MMA. You'll really like it. It's a compilation of all the lectures what has been given MMA with the embedded video. May I could you please step forward to do the honor to accept the book. It's another. Yes. The book can you see what to be a lot of lectures on some of the collection. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Until we meet again, bye-bye and good night. Thank you, viewers. Sorry, some of the questions are all answered by them. That's why we take up in the Q&A session.